Hello, welcome to North College Hill City Schools. I'm Anne Marie Barth. I'm the data coach at the elementary school, part of the teaching and learning team here. And we're excited that you are able to watch our presentation. We hope you learn a lot from today. I'm just going to go over, brief introductions of our team and then some objectives for today. NCH is a district that's about 5 to 10 miles north of Cincinnati, the actual city of Cincinnati. We are very small. We have one elementary, one middle school, and one high school. Our team is composed of 6 members. Our director is Michelle Garten. We have 2 instructional coaches. Emily Mulcahy services the middle school and high school. And then Kelly Knauer is the instructional coach at the elementary. Last year, we were able to add the 3 data coaches based on the school improvement grant. And so those are Jessica Lane. She mainly does math and science with middle and high school. And then Miranda Helbert does English language arts and social studies with middle and high school. So those 2 data coaches are located over there. And then myself, Anne Marie Barth, I service the elementary. So today we really want you guys to have a few things in your pocket after watching our presentation. We want you to understand the importance of the coaching culture where teachers, staff respect one another, where the data is noticed instead of being judged. And of course, that's kind of a tough process sometimes. But the more you do it, the more you practice with one another, and the more you establish that culture, it really comes out to benefit in the end. So that's a really crucial. Emily and Kelly will be talking about that a little bit later, giving you more details on that. The other thing we really want you to be able to grasp today is to be able to identify some components of our 3D form, which 3D stands for data-driven decision-making. We want you to be able to utilize that process right as you leave here today if wanted. But like we said, we would establish that culture first. That's important. But at least you would have the idea of what that form looks like and how to use it with your staff and your teachers. The last objective would be, we want you to see how this directly ties to OTES 2.0. Our teachers are glad that they have this process so that it's not one more thing that they have to do. It's already embedded in. It directly ties to their the high quality student data portion on OTES 2.0. And so it's much easier and a smoother process for them. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Emily, and they're going to be talking to you. Sorry about that. They're going to be talking to you about the coaching culture.
Thanks, Anne Marie. I'm Emily Mulcahy.
And I'm Kelly Knauer.
And we're going to talk to you about how we created a positive culture of coaching and data analysis here at North College Hill. So it's important to remember that coaching, when done correctly, can be one of the most powerful forms of professional development. But the other piece of that is remembering that it's always a process, that we're never going to be finished. The road to getting there is always going to be under construction. It's important to also know where we came from. So we came from a place with very low state test scores, and our district decided that we needed additional support. And the way that they decided to deal with that was to get us support from Hamilton County's ESC coaches. We had ELA and math coaches that were in the building a couple of days a week. They were here for K-12 teachers. Teachers met with them every couple of weeks to discuss short cycle assessments and sharing data and making decisions based on that data. They basically walked the grade level teams through the OIP process that we had. There were coaches in science and social studies, but they met even less frequently. They were more on a monthly basis during our early release times, but they did the same thing, helped with creation of the short cycle assessments and meeting about the data and the process. We used the state forms. As you can see, the OIP process, the forms where you had to fill out all of the standards and then break it down by your teachers. We also had the same 5-step process. It was very cumbersome. It was a lot of work for the teachers because you were calculating percentages and all that kind of thing. This is just more of the pages of those forms. So throughout this presentation, you'll see lots of quotes that sort of guided our process. And one of these is that quote here by Maya Angelou, because you do what you can until you know something better to do, and then you do something different. So that's what we did. They decided that the Hamilton County coaching was a good step, but we would do better to make some changes. So we created the Director of Teaching and Learning position, and you'll hear from Michelle in a few minutes. We ended the contract with the external coaches and created new internal instructional coaching positions for the elementary and for the middle school, high school. And then began professional development once that teaching and learning team became a part of the school or the school culture. And that was where I came in as one of the instructional coaches. We originally had 2 positions and 2 people hired, but then one of the people became an administrator in our district instead of an instructional coach. So it was just myself and Michelle for the first year. During that time, our biggest focus was on K-3 literacy, and we were looking at strengthening the core. We had just renewed our subscription with Reading Mastery, and so we did some training for the teachers on that. On top of that, I led the search for the new reading curriculum for grades 3 through 5, because we wanted something that would be very strong for that grade level as well. They decided on Journeys by HMH. I also did some work organizing the assessment systems. With AimsWeb, we began sort of a SWAT team approach of getting the benchmarking done. We had some organizations things that would need to be done with KRA. I went to the GLTs and assisted with their data discussions and did some work one-on-one with teachers, but it wasn't very pervasive. It was only teachers who had a specific area of growth that had been brought to my attention, that someone, usually an administrator, recommended that we work with them.
And then in year 2 of change, I came in. So we added a second instructional coach, and we divided the coaching into the elementary school and then the middle school and high school. So I was at the elementary and Emily was the middle school and high school. And during that year, we continued to organize assessment systems, and we were using AimsWeb Plus and helped GLT teams with their data tracking. We continued one-on-one coaching with teachers who had a specific area of growth, and we focused really strongly on building relationships with all teachers. Here we also continue to work on strengthening the core curriculum in ELA, and that consisted of also making a team with 6th through 8th grade teachers and instructional coaches to get a strong core curriculum, in which they decided was collections. We also that year focused on strengthening the math curriculum for K-8, and we reviewed several different curriculums with our curriculum team, and we chose Ready Math. So at the end of 2018 and 19, we had completely purchased new ELA and math curriculum for grades K through 8. Also that year, Emily and I did a book study on how to coach teachers to teach almost anything by Jill Jackson. And this was really a foundation that started us with the approach of coaching everyone. So what we really started with was this coaching priority skills checklist. And you can see here a few examples. There was classroom management skills, student engagement skills, lesson delivery skills. And we use this to observe teachers and basically a checklist of those different skills.
And we would try and focus in based upon things that we weren't seeing or things that we were seeing that weren't being done correctly on what we could target for them.
So we planned and piloted for coaching cycles that included all teachers and not just the ones who struggled. So this was during the second half of that year. We really wanted to adapt Jill's processes to fit at North College Hill. So teacher and coach to create an individual goal on together in coaching sessions. So we use those checklists to determine that goal. And every teacher needs to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can always be even better. So now we're on year 3 of implementation of our T&L team. We have added 3 new data coaches from the School Quality Improvement Grant Funds. And their roles were to collect and analyze universal screen of data. We have now adopted iReady for the district. And another role is to analyze data from state report card to assist with future implementation. They streamlined processes for teacher data discussions and use, and they began the data-driven decision-making data forms, the 3D forms. This is some screenshots of what our 3D forms used to look like. What we did was we took the OIP process and the 5-step process from Ohio and made them our own. So we really focused on the process, but made the forms more user-friendly for our teachers.
And our goal for year 3 as instructional coaches was to really work on finding the area that all teachers needed to work. Remember, we talked about those priority skills from the Jill Jackson book. And so if you can start at the teacher's point of need or point of growth, then you can build that relationship much more quickly. So that was our goal. And as we moved into year 3, our roles expanded. So we had to have a lot of conversation about what instructional coaching is and what it is not. And so it's the idea of working together regularly with teachers and focusing on those important routines and skills. What it's not is those casual walkthroughs and in the moment feedback and coaching that you see in the in-depth kind of observations that happen with your OTES evaluations. The follow through is the part that's important, and we're going to talk about that actual process that we went through in just a minute. So we had to really define these roles not only for ourselves but for the administrators as well, because there was some pushback from administrators to find out what coaches were talking about. And to build that relationship, you really have to have some confidentiality. The teachers need to understand that what they say to you and the conversations that you have as a coach are not necessarily going back to the administration. So it took several years to sort of build that trust in teachers. And part of that came from having a conversation with administrators and saying, we're not going to be sharing with you all of the conversations that are going on in our coaching meetings.
So we began implementing the Jill Jackson coaching philosophy of working with all teachers on predetermined individual goals. And this is where we really started to develop our process. So we did a pre-conference with all teachers, and then we gathered data, so that could be by planning sessions, check-ins, or observations, and then we would have a debriefing session with them. And we started to use a simple coaching tracking form at the beginning of that school year, and it was just a way to track the data from our coaching sessions and be organized. So then one of our new data coaches took our paper tracking form and made it online to be more efficient for us, and we piloted a new coaching dashboard.
During this time, we also introduced what we called our teaching and learning assessment cycle. It's not a new cycle. Teachers are familiar with this from our OIP process, but we just made it a little more user-friendly. So teachers would pre-assess, they would use our teaching and learning framework to teach their lesson, assess, look at the data, reteach as needed, reassess as needed based upon that. And we would spend our time during this time working with teachers on how to use that data to take their next steps to do the reteaching as well. So the teaching and learning framework is just a research-based model that helps design effective instruction. And this is our graphic for the teaching and learning framework. And the first piece is the class time, the teaching time. And you can see that we have marked it like a clock so that teachers could take their 50-minute bell and understand how best to use the time within their bell. We've marked both times when the highest degree of retention is, according to brain research. We've also marked the different types of instruction, anticipatory set, direct instruction, processing time, independent practice, and closure. And we've also put in the gradual release so that teachers can see when those would occur during a lesson. Within each of the wedges that you see here, there would be lists of activities or strategies that would be clickable links to take teachers to more information about that strategy. So if they wanted a strategy for an anticipatory set of using a video, there would be a link there that would take them to more information. Underneath the teaching and learning framework, or as a part of the teaching and learning framework, there is also always the support of your MTSS system. So our positive behavior interventions and supports, our social emotional learning, and our academic interventions as well.
Also in year 3, we continue to focus on strengthening our core, and we wanted to focus on science and social studies for K-12. So we adopted a new curricula, Discovery Education. We also facilitated ongoing professional development in all other core curricula. As a team, we continued our professional development with the book, Get Better Faster.
So coach, we decided as we move forward that we really needed to, again, expand our thinking about coaching. Is not someone who knows everything, but our goal is to help teachers learn to build that capacity within themselves for learning. We are not necessarily the expert who knows all, but we are there to help in any way we can.
Year 4 of change was a different year for all of us. It was COVID-19, which for our district meant virtual and blended learning. We did maintain our whole T&L team with all 6 members. Our data coaches continue to improve data systems for efficiency for our teachers. We continue to coach teachers in some capacity based on their individual goals, and we really assisted teachers with strategies for online teaching and learning. We continued the T&L professional development. We started a new book study, the assessment playbook for distance and blended learning. We implemented a new coaching dashboard, and we continued 3D forms online and updating them.
So we're going to take a minute and show you the coaching dashboard that was created for us. You'd seen the paper copies, and then you saw the other updated online version, and then our data coach created an event tracker for us so that it was very easy in Google Form to find a teacher and be able to take notes during our sessions, all the different kinds of sessions that we have. And then from there, we can choose the bell, write notes to ourselves that are not seen by teachers, action steps of things we need to work on in between our next meeting, email the teacher things that they need to work on, and it will already also go ahead and schedule the next event and send an email to the teacher about that. That information is then compiled in a dashboard called our tracker. You can see that it can be filtered by the 2 different coaches that we have. Shows the total number of coaches, and now that I've put it to myself, the number of coaches or teachers I'm working with, how many meetings we've had, upcoming steps, the types of meetings that we've had. It will also show the types of meetings over time. So if you need to see a particular week, you can see the kinds of meetings that occurred, the amount of time that was used during those weeks. You can do that by teacher as well, the kind of events and the amount of time. And then we have some different graphs down here that show, again, the different categories of teachers and how much time and what types of events were had. We can also zoom in on a specific teacher, which is very helpful as the coach as we're getting ready for our next meetings, because I can pull up one particular teacher as I'm getting ready to meet with them and look back at their notes and see the upcoming event, the previous events that we've had, and all of the notes for those meetings, as well as the different types of meetings we've had and how much time we've spent in each of those. And this dashboard does also include a link to that coaching event tracker if we would need it. So our goal, again, during this year of COVID was really to work on optimism and self-sufficiency for teachers. A lot of our coaching time was spent doing venting sessions with teachers as they struggled through the challenges of teaching during a pandemic. And our goal was always to leave them with some kind of optimism and belief that even though it was hard, we were doing the best we could, and everybody was working as hard as they could. So some final thoughts, again, that we've found have been very important. Coaches should not be enforcers, reporters, and evaluators. As I said earlier in the presentation, it's not our job to report back to administration how things are going. It's our job to be there for the teachers. We're not there to fix them. It's important that they understand that that's not our perspective on it. We're there to help in any way we can. And it should bring out the best in people, help them discover their strengths, help with teams and compassion and becoming resilient as an educator.
So here are kind of our next steps as a team and where we're going. We plan to continue coaching for teachers on their individual goals. We continue to streamline systems for data analysis and usage. We want to focus on assessments and dive into standards. Next year, we plan to include the Get Better Faster book and action steps with staff to increase teacher efficiency and student achievement. We want to continue the focus on strength of instruction within the core curricula and increase student achievement. And then we also want to broaden focus to include implementation of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions.
And so we're going to hand it off to Michelle for the next part of our presentation.
How did North College Hill go from compliance to collaboration? First of all, everything that we did in our team, we had a purpose for it. We had a plan, and everything in that plan had a purpose. It's very important that you lay out a plan ahead of time. We created independent teacher-based teams. by grade level or content. Now, the word independent there is really important. We'd been having teacher-based teams for many years, but they weren't really addressing the idea or need for data. We tried to comply with the ODE requirements for the Ohio improvement process, and we worked on it, but it just didn't seem to really fit into what we were doing. But we knew that it was important. So we worked on creating independent teacher-based teams by creating teacher leader positions. Teacher leaders are given a small stipend each year, and they facilitate the TBTs with coaching help when needed. And what we did was we also taught teachers to notice data and to not judge it. Just notice patterns and trends. When you start judging data and judging people based on it, they want to shy away from it, and then they don't use it for the right purpose, which is to inform their instruction. We created tools to make the collaboration more efficient. So everything we did, we tried to make it so those teacher-based teams had everything they needed to be efficient and to be able to use the data in a way that made sense for them. We coached teachers where they were at. Some of our teachers are really good at spreadsheets and some aren't. And so we took them where they were and tried to just move them and tried to help them with what they needed. We project managed how quickly we put out new tasks and so forth. That's been extremely vital the past year with the pandemic. Teachers are stressed. They have an added stress that's not normal. It's something that none of us have gone through. And so we are very conscious of what we rolled out during that time, making very sure that we were rolling things out slowly. You know, we're excited when we have a new form because we're excited about it and we think it's so much more efficient, but not all teachers are as excited as we are. So what makes a plan successful? Well, you see a need. Our need really wasn't OTEST 2.0, high quality student data. Our really need was that we had low achievement and that students were not proficient in the Ohio State standards. And so we needed to do something to improve on that. And we knew that looking at data was a very important piece that we were missing. We were looking at data, but we weren't looking at it with the intent of reteaching students who weren't proficient and with the intent of changing our instruction based on it. So our need was really bigger than OTEST 2.0. We brainstormed with our stakeholders, our teachers. We listened. We really listened. We created a pilot with volunteers. Those people who are super techie and want to volunteer, they knew that when they volunteered, we'd be tweaking the system along the way, and they were good with that. Then year one, we allowed for volunteers. We asked for anyone who wanted to come on board year one, they could. And then we told them the year two would be mandatory, so they had a choice between year one or year two. That gives people some flexibility. During year two, when it was mandatory, we did coach people, and we had a lot of grace. So if someone wasn't doing it, we went to them and talked to them and said, what can we do to help you? Year three is finally where we do full implementation with fidelity and accountability. So now it becomes somewhat of an evaluative manner or situation if the teacher is not making good efforts to comply with what we're asking them to do, and that they're not buying into the fact that it is a collaboration among their peers. And the last thing that we did to make sure that the plan was successful was dedicated time to it. Our district board of education and administrators said that they gave us data late start days, and that meant on Fridays once a month, students would come in 2 hours late, and teachers would have that complete time to look at data, go through the forms really carefully, and to go through every step, and they had the time to do it. And now they're really quick at it, and it doesn't take them 2 hours. It takes them more like 30 minutes. Okay, let's get to OTEST 2.0 because it is here, and it is something that we need to address with all of our teachers. So I'll just look at the high quality student data part of it. And the whole goal behind it is to look at the evidence of student learning based on one particular teacher. So what is it that that teacher did to contribute to the learning of the students in their classroom? It's supposed to include value added, and it will when the pandemic is over, but right now that's not a component. And then notice that high quality student data is used throughout the whole evaluation, not just in the parts that say high quality student data, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, I wanted you to know that we use the checkmark list here from ODE to find the right type of instrument, make sure it was rigorous, and we went through and checked all of those off and believe that they are addressed in our tool. The next one was that we wanted to make sure that the data was reflected upon in an appropriate manner, so we went through that checklist also. And so this is our method that we used. First of all, we created a chart listing all the types of teachers in the district that would be evaluated. And that chart looks like this. I'm going to go out though and show you the chart itself so you get a better picture of it. So what teachers were done, they were directed to go to this chart. They were directed to look on the left in the blue for their type of teaching situation. So you notice we have co-teaching, intervention specialist. So if you're a co-teacher and you're the intervention specialist, you go to this row. Self-contained classroom. We tried to list all the different situations that we have in our district. Okay, then once they came here, what's listed across of here are their different options that the team determined was valuable information, high quality student data, and met all of the checkmark requirements that I just went through. And so we deemed quarterly standards-based assessments and then standards-based content formative assessments. And then some teachers had iReady fall to winter. Notice we don't say winter to spring, only because by that time the evaluations are normally done. And so we went through each one. We've adjusted this a little bit through the time. But once teachers came here, they then could click the link and it went to a verification form. I'll just pop over here and show you the form. Here is the form. And each teacher would, when they clicked on that link, it would go to their specific form. They'd fill in their information at the top. Listed was already the 3 to 2, 2 to 3 different high quality student data choices that they had. Here's again the criteria, always kind of emphasizing that. Comment was that 3D forms had to be used for data analysis. It wasn't a choice for teachers to do it on paper. And then the teacher signed it and dated it and gave it to their evaluator. This helped everybody to be a little bit more accountable throughout the whole process. I also think teachers really like to know the success criteria. They want to know, what do I have to do or what should I be doing to get a good evaluation and to be doing what you want me to do. So over here on this side, we also told teachers how many cycles they should have done each quarter or within the 9 weeks of their class. So we listed it by if it's a 7-week class, a 9-week class, and so forth. Notice also we have virtual teachers down here. We do not currently evaluate them on OTEST 2.0. We have an MOU with the union that we have a different rubric for them. Hopefully down the road we'll come up with something that allows them to do something very valuable with the data that they receive. So let me go ahead and continue. Okay, sorry about that. Didn't think it would take that long. Okay, let's look at the rubric. I went through the rubric and just identified a few areas where high quality student data could be looked at. So of course now this is focus for learning. It's the first one on the rubric. And I question you though is make sure that as a district that you've agreed on what you're actually evaluating, because this one says that you will analyze patterns in at least 2 sources of high quality student data, but you do that in order to develop goals, student growth goals. And so I always ask people, which one are you looking at? The fact that there's data, but then the fact of what you do with that data. Is it, do you create student goals? Sorry. Okay, the next one is that the teacher connections to prior and future learning, again, still under focus for learning. The teacher plans lessons that intentionally make clear and coherent connections with student prior learning and future learning. Well, the 3D forms definitely talk about reteaching, and so that would be future learning. And prior learning would be that if a students all use an assessment and they all score high, the prior learning is most likely very solid. So you can also incorporate that there. And again, for each district, it's going to be slightly different. You just have to make these match what is working for your students or your teachers. This one is under connections to state standards and district priorities. And definitely the 3D form will identify and align with student needs very specifically. And it also, of course, aligns to the Ohio standards because they have to list the standard for which they are assessing the student. And then this is knowledge of students. It may include needs, skills, and so forth. And again, the 3D form identifies the student needs on what they need to do to become proficient on standards that is addressed. And assessment of student learning. Uses multiple assessments, yes. Analyzes patterns, yes. Modify instruction and differentiate to meet the needs of groups of students, yes. Our 3D form does all of these things because it's a cycle of improvement. It's a very typical cycle of improvement that always addresses these needs on a cycle. Evidence of student learning, again, 2 sources of high quality student data that you still have labeled out on that form that the teachers originally signed. It all fits together, and it all fits together so that data equals more instructional time. If teachers use data appropriately and in a very efficient manner, they will end up having more instructional time to teach what the students need to know, not maybe what they already know or maybe what's too ahead of them. They can teach students right where they're at with what they need, and that's a win-win for everyone. Next, I have Jessica Lane coming up to talk to you about the tool that was created that really has made things much more efficient for teachers. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So I am going to be talking about the tools that we're using at North College Hill in order to make data collection and reflection more efficient, especially for the teachers, but just the staff in general as well, just so that we can gain a little bit of buy-in and show the teachers that we really value the time that they're spending doing all the other things that they have to do, and we want to make sure that we make this as efficient as possible for them so that they can spend their time with the reflection piece rather than all of the tedious math and everything that goes along with it. So what we did was take the OIP process and kind of manipulate it a little bit to make it a little bit easier for those that are not so mathematically inclined, and of course to make the whole process much more efficient. So I'm going to show you the 3D form that we have for teachers. Remember that 3D stands for data-driven decision making. So we're going to go to a sample form. This is a sample teacher with all sample data and students in here. And this is the title page of their 3D form. So it's all on Google Sheets, which means that it's very easily manipulated and corrected. However, there are lots of formulas and everything. We keep a lot of it protected just to kind of avoid anything going wrong, but I also have a ticket system in case the inevitable happens and I can jump in there and fix it for them. So you have the teacher's name, any comments that they've left for any viewers of their 3D form, and then you have the benchmarks over here for the different proficiency levels. Basically what this does is walk through 8 cycles with the teacher. And those cycles include assessing the students, analyzing the data from the assessment, determining what the reteaching will look like, coming up with a reteaching plan, doing the reteaching, reassessing the students, and then reflecting on whether or not the reteaching worked. So that's like the typical cycle that we go through. And you can see here that we have on the title page 8 different cycles. Under each cycle you have the standard, whether or not it's been completed. So it could either be, if it's not completed, it looks like a dash here. If it's completed, it says complete. Or if you assessed your students and in the initial assessment, 100% of students scored 70% or higher, you may still want to do a reteaching plan, but you don't have to record that on the sheet. So it would just say 100% proficient right here. And that kind of signals to the viewer that there was not a reteaching plan that was actually recorded on the form for that cycle. Okay, so you have links for each section or each step for each cycle. So right now we are going to actually go to cycle 6, and we're going to start with step 1A. So 1A means that we are recording the scores for all of the students that took the assessment. Okay, the very first thing that teachers have to do when they get their form is put in the names of all of their students, mark whether or not those students have an IEP 504, and then they also have the opportunity to put here which period those students are in so that they can separate the data by period as well. All of that only has to be done once for all 8 cycles. And then once they have that done, they can start putting in their assessment data. Each cycle has these 4 columns. So we're going to go to cycle 6. You can put in the standard here and the skill. You can also link to any assessment that you may have in these 2 boxes. So let's say we assess the students on the standard. We do not have a skill in there, but we can put a skill in there. This is the date of the assessment, so 12/15/2020. And then we went ahead and recorded all of the student scores. Now you can actually just go in here and type them all, but we also have a percentage calculator that I'm going to show you when we go to put in the reassessment scores as well. It's going to tell you the average percentage, and then it's also going to tell you the number of students that were assessed. You can see that the scores are all color-coded, and that is by proficiency. So you can see whether or not they are way below, near, or at or above proficient. If they are at or above proficient, which means that they scored 70% or higher, then that score is automatically put into the reassessment column, just in case you are not including them in the reteaching plan. However, if you do decide to reteach and reassess those students that, say, Phyllis, we know can do better than 71%, then you can overwrite this by just putting their new percentage in there. I also went ahead and marked students that were absent in this column. You can see absent. So our teachers use that in different ways. They can either use it for chronically absent students, or they can use it just to keep track of which students were absent for that initial assessment. Okay, so we have all the scores in there for that initial assessment. So we're going to go back to the title page by following this link, and we are going to go to step 1B. Step 1B is taking a look at the number of, or the percentage of students that fall into each proficiency group. So you can see here that with all of our students, 5% of them fell way below, and 15% below, 23% near, and 56% proficient and above. It also categorizes it into subgroups. So you have students with disabilities and students without disabilities. So you can very easily see if there are any gaps. So right here, you can see that only 8% of students with disabilities scored proficient and above, when 66% of students without disabilities scored proficient and above. So that would be kind of a red flag for us. Also, we have the chronically absent. Obviously, we only have the assessment data in there, so we can only see that the students who were marked absent do not actually have any data, so therefore do not fall into any of the subgroups. The rest of this we're going to get to here in a bit. You can also change between cycles, so if you want to go back to cycle 2 and see the data for cycle 2, you can do that there, but we're going to keep it on cycle 6. I'm going to go back to the title page. Now we're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 is analyzing the student work specific to the data. Okay, so we have at the top of this page all of our groupings for all the students. This is including every student that you have listed there. So you can see it's a pretty long list. It's kind of hard to see. You can go over here and actually sort by period. So if we go to period 1, then we're only seeing the students in period 1 that scored either way below, near, or proficient and above. And so their names and the scores right beside their names. So step 2 is analyzing the student work. So we are going to jot down the strengths and weaknesses that we noticed on that assessment. And then we're going to go ahead and move it directly to step 3. We could go back to the title page and then come back to step 3, but it's all on one page, so we can just scroll down. Step 3 is coming up with a reteaching plan. So you go through, group your students. You have rationale for the grouping, listing the students. Some teachers in some situations say, I'm just grouping all the near proficient students together. However, sometimes the students in the near proficient group might be in that group for different reasons, and then you might want to separate them as well. So that's why it gives you the option to list the students. Standard or topic focus, the date of the reteach assessment, the adult responsible for reteaching, the reteaching strategy that's being used, and the evidence. So what are you looking for to determine whether or not that student or that group of students actually are now proficient? We can move on to step 4 then. Step 4 is just going to ask you in general, what is the teacher doing and what are the students doing while you are implementing the reteaching? Okay, so we came up with a reteaching plan. Now we're going to actually go do the reteaching, come back, and record the students' assessment scores for the reassessment. Once again, we're on cycle 6. So let's say we reassess January 19th. Okay, And we have all the scores, but they're not on a 100-point scale, so we don't want to go ahead and put them in here. We want to go to the percentage calculator. And on the percentage calculator, you have a box for the points possible for that assessment. So that assessment had 25 points possible. The student names automatically come up here, so you can record the points earned, and it is going to automatically give you the percentage. Okay, so you can do it one of two ways. You can either do it by points earned or points missed. So we did it by points earned. So we recorded all the points earned. It went ahead and figured out the percentage for us. We're going to come up here. We want to copy to cycle 6. We want to copy the blue scores into cycle 6 reassessments. We're going to go ahead and do that. So now we have all the reassessment scores in there. We can see how much they grew, or by how many percentage points they grew or dropped. And then we also see the average number of percentage points that they grew by. We can also determine how many students were assessed. So we only had 73 assessed on the assessment, but we were able to bring that up to 81 students assessed on the reassessment. And we can also look at the overall percentage. So it looks like even though some students grew, our actual overall percentage went down by 3 points. And again, these are all just random numbers, so it's going to say whatever the random numbers want it to say. We can scroll down here and see all of the different growth from each of the students. And then we can go back to the title page. And next we're going to go to step 5B. Step 5B is analyzing the assessment data after we have done the reteaching. So again, we're back to the same chart, but now we have the reassessment scores or percentages in here as well. So essentially what we want to see is that these groups down here at the bottom are going to decrease. And it looks like it did with the students with disabilities, so that's great. And then we want to see more students falling into either the near proficient or the proficient and above. So that's kind of what we're looking for. We can also see now that the students that were chronically absent, where those students fall now that we have reassessed and retaught and reassessed. It also flags any students that dropped more than 10 percentage points from assessment to reassessment. It looks like we don't have any students flagged for that reason, but they would be here if they had. And then we can see the percentage of students that are moving between the different levels. So we can see that we had 7% of students move from near proficient to proficient and above. You can also see jumping between 2 levels or all the way from way below to proficient and above. If you want more detail on that, this actually gives the number of students and it lists those students, so you have an opportunity to celebrate those students in your classroom for their growth. So we're going to go back to the title page and go to our very last step, which is 5C, reflect on reteaching. This is where we're going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of the reteaching after we look at the reassessment data, and we're going to determine whether or not there are any next steps. So whether we want to continue reteaching, if there's some additional intervention, etc. And that kind of completes the entire cycle. So again, this form has 8 cycles that can be recorded on it. We actually have some teachers that have already worked through all 8 cycles and are now starting on their second form of the year. And it just gives a really, really easy way for us to look at whether or not the teachers are reflecting on that data, so that we as the teaching and learning team can support them in that. And then of course their evaluators have the proof that they need to determine whether or not they are fulfilling that part of the OTES 2.0 rubric. Next, we have the 3D for teacher teams. So this is for any team that has a common assessment. So I have one of these pulled up as well, one that's already been used by a 3rd grade team. So you have the content here, the norms, the assessment type, the standard, the date, facilitator, timekeeper, recorder, an opportunity to leave comments as well, whether or not it's been completed. And then you also can record the teachers' names here. So teacher 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Once you have all the teachers' names recorded, each teacher can follow the link to their page. All they have to do is copy in their URL and choose which cycle number it is. And after they do that, it will fill in all of their data for them. So I have here just some random data. And then they can scroll over to the right and they can see either their own individual data or they can see everyone's data all together. So once everyone's gotten together and is able to look at that data as a group, then they can go back to the title page and they can go to steps 2, 3, and 4, where they analyze student work, which looks very similar to what you saw on the regular 3D form. It's just talking more about like common goals and common action steps that they're coming up with in steps 3 and 4 as well. Then they will individually go to their own 3D forms, fill in that reassessment data, and then come back here again to talk about whether or not there are any next steps after analyzing the data. So that's just a way for teachers to kind of pull all of their data together without actually having to do much more than just copying and pasting their URL and telling it exactly which cycle they would like to look at. So that's an overview of the 3D for teachers and 3D for teacher teams, but we also have a 3D for leadership teams. So that's going to be a kind of a very similar process, but this time we're looking at more holistic picture of the data from the school. So both our building leadership team and our district leadership teams create a schedule for looking at that. They go in and individually notice trends in the data. They come together, determine action steps and progress monitoring. They view the data after they have put those action steps in place. Individually, again, they reflect and then they come back together to discuss the level of fidelity and determine which data they want to continue to discuss in the next meeting. Okay, so all of that data is put on dashboards like this for both our BLT and DLT. You can see the last updated, this is for the teacher 3D completion, so you can see whether or not those 3D forms are being completed with fidelity across all the different buildings. You can also see the number of cycles that have been started, or the number of teachers who have started which cycles in different months of the year, and then you can also see individually whether or not teachers have the majority of their cycles completed, proficient, or have not started yet. So all of that data is here. We do a really good job pushing the culture of just noticing and wondering and being transparent about the data that we have within our buildings, and all the teachers know that all this data is collected. We can also see student 3D performance on a separate dashboard, so that shows us their performance on the assessments that are recorded on the 3D forms. We can also see reassessments versus assessments, so we can see that for the vast majority of the assessments, the reassessment scores have been higher. There has been growth. And then this looks kind of messy, but you can always zoom in or pick a certain teacher to look at. It's actually showing the amount of growth for each cycle for each teacher. So you can kind of get in here and see, okay, what happened in this cycle and how can we support that teacher in coming up with a plan for the students that actually had negative growth for that particular cycle. We also have a 3D for intervention specialists. So this is for progress monitoring. The intervention specialist can come in and put an annual goal or an objective. They can record the baseline and the target score that they want that student to achieve. And this kind of helps them keep track of how many opportunities that student has been given, what their scores were across those different opportunities. They can record the teacher strategies used, strengths, weaknesses, any additional notes, and determine how much progress is left to go so far. They also have the opportunity to record any evidence. So they can upload evidence to a Google form and it will show up on this dashboard as well. So it just gives a really easy picture of whether or not that student has been making progress on those goals. There are lots of other dashboards that I have created for North College Hill with the help of the rest of the teaching and learning team. So we actually have an LPDC staff dashboard where teachers can come or any certified staff can come and see their goals, their license details, whether or not that license is ready to be renewed. They can keep track of all of their CEUs and everything on here. Our LPDC members actually have a dashboard to keep track of what has been approved and what has not been approved, and it gives them a really easy way to link to those documents, approve them very quickly, and then move on to the next one. So it just makes things a lot easier on their end. We also have a student data dashboard that I've received a lot of help from Kelly Knauer, one of the other coaches, in creating, and this kind of gives us our overall risk, and then also breaks down the students into tiers for attendance, referral. We have math tiers, reading tiers, and any other kind of like academic tiers that we want to include on here. That student data dashboard also has a student-specific page, so it gives the student and all the demographics. We have a couple buttons that show up. This one has a REMP. You have the overall risk level, and then you have the tiers for that student. We also have a communication tracker, so you can click on the link down here to determine whether or not there's been any communication made by people within the district. And that looks very similar to this. So you can either look at it by student or overall, and you can see the contact that has been made, the success rate, the reason for the contact, the sentiment, whether it was a positive call home, neutral, or negative, and then also what type of contact it was. So maybe it wasn't a phone call home, maybe it was an email or a text message, and then you can also see all the details down here below. We also have a standards dashboard for the elementary school. Again, this was kind of a brainchild of Kelly Knauer that I helped her put together, and it kind of shows the standards mastery for each grade level. And you can also look up student-specific data and determine whether or not they mastered that standard, what source it was coming from, so whether they mastered it on iReady or through a 3D form, and the date that they mastered that standard. So I actually have a side business where I do this for other schools, and it's 8817 Jessica Lane. I do a lot with data, obviously, and just organization systems in general. And this is my website and my email, so feel free to contact me if you're interested in bringing any of these types of things to your school. And I just want to take one last minute to reintroduce everyone that you heard talking today, and just our team in general. So we have Michelle, the Director of Teaching and Learning, Kelly and Emily are our two instructional coaches, and then Anne-Marie, myself, and Miranda are the data coaches for North College Hill. So if you have any questions, or if there's anything you want to chat about, feel free to reach out to any of us. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and you were able to gather some knowledge and kind of figure out where you need to go in order to help establish that positive culture around data, and help your teachers and the rest of your staff really take some time to reflect on data and make data-driven decisions.